Welcome back. It's episode 20. This week, we go behind the scenes at Promontory Summit and the shops there.
And we've got some news and favorite finds.
This is Railroad Showcase.
Earlier in the big week, we headed straight to Promontory Summit, and we had a chance to get some behind-the-scenes footage at the Golden Spike National Historic Park. And it is a park now.
Yes.
Since its inception, for decades, it has been a National Historic Site. But just a week or two before the big event, it got signed into law that it is now a full-on National Historic Park, and so that was really cool. And so we headed over there Monday, and they had people, national park employees that they had pulled from several states away because they knew this was going to be a huge event. And one of the people that they had brought in was Julie Blanchard, who is an expert in media relations and public relations. And she was kind enough to introduce us to all of the right people. And she was willing herself to get on camera and be interviewed and talk about what it was like to work at the park, because earlier in her career, she had been at Promontory, and also all of the preparations that went in to get ready for this huge week for them.
Yeah, and it was really nice for us to meet Cole Chisholm. He works in the engine shops, and he gave us a great tour around talking about the Jupiter and the 119 and some of the maintenance that they need to do to upkeep the engines and what it's like for them to prepare for this event. And again, he was really generous with his time in showing us around. And so it was really great to meet both Julie and Cole.
Yeah, thank you guys.
These are constructed in the 1970s in Costa Mesa, California by O'Connor Engineering Laboratories. The idea was to have running replicas out here at the site, and they were delivered in time for the 110th anniversary, 1979. They're built to within 1/4 of an inch of accuracy. The way they're painted is historically accurate, as close as we can get based on the latest research. All the brass, all the gold leafing was pretty standard at the time. So the way you see them today is as close as we can get you to the real deal back in 1869.
So originally the park was kind of made into a National Historic Site in 1957. And that was by the Secretary of Interior. So it wasn't part of the National Park Service at that time. It was just kind of designated as a site, and there wasn't much out here except a big obelisk. In 1965 is when Congress passed enabling legislation, which made it part of the National Park Service under the Department of Interior. 69, of course, was our big centennial that took place out here. And a lot of people that I have talked to since I've been here were here in 69, and they're planning to come out for the 150th. So it'll be interesting to see, what their impressions are between the two. And then the locomotives came here in 79. Is kind of the other big date for us. And so they just celebrated their 40th birthday last week. So those two replica locomotives have been here for 40 years.
So out here in 1969, they did have two engines out on the tracks for the 100th anniversary. Those were loaners from the Nevada State Railroad Museum. And it was actually the Nevada State Railroad Museum sort of asking for those back that prompted us to get these running locomotives out here you see today. So they were out here, I believe, until 78, and then they were taken back to Nevada State. But they sat out in the elements, unlike these that are pretty pampered and have a garage to live in. They sort of sat out there all seasons. There's pictures where it looks like a blizzard came through and just kind of coated them over, and there's tarps over the caps to sort of protect them in some way. But they were in no way as close and accurate as these engines are. They just sort of were painted up to look like the two.
So normally during the summertime, the locomotives do operate daily, and they come out in the morning, they do a steam demonstration in the middle of the day, and then go back to the engine house in the evening. Throughout the day, visitors come to the visitor center. They see the exhibits, they watch the video. We have one video that plays every half hour, and we have 5 others that play on request in our smaller auditorium. They go out and they visit the last spike site and see the spot where the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. And when the locomotives are there, it's kind of a really nice scene to look at. So you've got the last spike site right in between the 2 locomotives.
So normally we'd get in at 8 o'clock. We'd light a fire in the engines first thing, then start to complete our oil rounds. There's a whole bunch of different points we have to oil every day, and then there's things we have to oil weekly. So depending on the day of the week it is, depends on how much oil you got to go through. During that time, we're also building the fire, getting this up to pressure. About 9:30ish, we'll pull the engines out onto the pad here, do last-minute things we might have to do. There's a lot of wiping because they may leave the shop clean every day, but they come back dusty and dirty because there's plenty of dust up here. And then at 10 o'clock, Jupiter will go down the tracks and park down at the last spike site after doing a run up and down. And the 119 will come back and a vehicle pick it up and drive it down, because we usually only have enough crew here to run one engine at a time for regular days in the summer. So we'll run her up and down the siding, then park her at the last spike site and call it good. And then we'll repeat that again at 1 o'clock, and at 4 o'clock we'll do the same runs, but we'll just bring them back home. We have to hold it at pressure for the next couple days while they're setting up for the big sesquicentennial. We're not running because there's a lot of construction going on down there, but we have to maintain enough heat in it so it doesn't cool down and reconstrict the metal. Because when they're hot like this, it only takes about an hour in the morning to get them ready to go again. But if we let it cool down, you're looking at 6 to 8 hours before we can have enough pressure to operate. Air pump is a design of one of the original ones. It was patented in May of 1869, so it's the same time that the ceremony took place. So originally you wouldn't have seen this in 1869 on the 119 or on the Jupiter, but we want to stop when we want to stop, so use of air brakes is sort of important on that. So what you're seeing here is one of the first models of a Westinghouse air pump, and if you read historical articles on it and how much of a pain it was and what kind of issues they had back then, we're still encountering those issues, so we must be somewhat accurate on this pump because it doesn't always want to work for us. In fact, 2 years ago we had an issue where just the reversing rod got bent just slightly, and it didn't want to circulate, it didn't want to do any work for us, and it put us out for about a month. So there's plenty of fun issues with those.
So this week, we always celebrate May 10th on the day. Doesn't matter what day of the week it lands on. And so this year in 2019, it ends up on a Friday. And because it's the 150th, the state of Utah created a commission to raise money and to have a really big event out here. And so they decided, instead of just having a one-day event, to have a 3-day event. So the events are taking place on the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. Not only will we have our usual ceremony where we have dignitaries coming in, making remarks, a keynote speaker, and the reenactment, there's also an additional festival grounds that is taking place on the south side of the visitor center, which we would normally use for some overflow parking during our events. That whole area will have historical exhibits. There'll be a frontier village, a Hell on Wheels town. There'll be a few teepees out there. An innovation exhibit with STEM activities for the kids. That's being done in partnership with the Hill Air Force Base. We normally have one food vendor out here for the 10th. There'll be 12 food trucks out in our parking lot. And so, yeah, it's just a much bigger event. There'll be musical acts happening on our main stage as well as over in the festival area as well. It's hard to imagine what 15,000 people plus is going to look like out here. Those are the numbers we're expecting for May 10th. And even May 11th, we're expecting right around 15,000 people as well. A normal May 10th event, we probably get 2,000 to 3,000 people. And even that fills up the grounds in front of where the ceremony takes place. So likely it's going to be a standing room only event. We're encouraging people to bring their own chairs and blankets so they do have a place to sit while they're here. But likely if you want to see anything, you're likely going to have to stand during the event. Yeah, I have a lot of good memories from working out here. So it's been great to be back and to be out here again and see the locomotives. So last week when the 119 came out for the first time for the season, it was pretty exciting to see that again and hear it and smell it. I haven't gotten to experience that for over 10 years.
So here are our injectors. We have 4 of them. We put 2 on the engines, and then the other 2 are the ones that we reshop throughout the summer, and then we can tag them out and put them right back on the engines, take the old one off, and rebuild those. So these are the ones that ran last year. That's why they look also dingy and dirty and not very presentable. Now the 119 was the only engine in 1869 that was actually outfitted with an injector. Rogers, when they built this, it was sort of state-of-the-art for 1868. So there were a lot of things that it had that other engines didn't necessarily have. For example, Jupiter didn't have an injector at the time. She only had crosshead pumps as a means of getting water into the boiler. However, today you have to have at least 2 methods of getting water into the boiler. So we hide an injector up in Jupiter's cab. So that way from the ground she still looks historically accurate to a point. But we can still then inject water into the boiler, which works for us because we stand still for so long for much of the day that crosshead pumps, it doesn't really work out too well for us. You can see the murals on it. The one over here is of Patterson Falls in Patterson, New Jersey. And back when I was an interp ranger, I'd point that out to people. And I actually had a group from Patterson, New Jersey in my tour group, and they looked at it and said, well, that does look like it. So the artist did a good job capturing that. And then the mural on the other side, a lot of people say looks like the Tetons or a mountain range in the west. And so here on the back, you sort of have the east meeting the west on this engine as the Union Pacific is going from the east to meet up with the west. And a lot of people ask, is that accurate or did you just doll it up because, it was famous? But that's originally what they had on the engine. You can see pictures of those murals. And it's kind of blows people's mind when you see that and all the gold leafing and realize the 119 was designed to haul freight, not necessarily passengers. So the level of artistry they put into these engines, even though they weren't going to haul people, was kind of insane.
Yeah, they did it different back then.
Mm-hmm. It was all about attracting the eye, a form of advertisement. We do have a gentleman, Jim Ingram, that comes out from California every year and touches up the gold leafing for us. He was out here 2 weeks ago. So he helps us out with that because finding someone who can gold leaf is, it's an art form that's not as widely well known anymore. Here in Sacramento, it's 690 miles, and a full tender load would be from the floor up to the roof of the cab, from the front all the way back. Yeah, I think that's about 4 cords of wood, and you're looking at a range of 15 to 30 miles for that. So between here and Sacramento, that's stopping at least 23 times just to fill up on wood. So eventually when the line was connected, they could ship the coal profitably out to them, and they started converting some of their engines to burn coal. But at the time, they just had to do with what they had. This here's your Johnson bar, your reverser. Pretty simple. You push it forward to go forward, you pull it back to go back. Here you have 2 sets of brakes. Originally in 1869, you would have had neither of these. You would have just had the manual handbrake back here on the tender. This one though here is if you have cars behind you, it's your train brake, and then the one over here by the window is our independent brake. We only ever use the independent brake because we don't have any cars out here. Maybe someday we'll get to use the train brake, but as of right now, it's just the independent. Here, this is your throttle. Further back you pull it, the more steam goes down into the cylinders. So just kind of like a gas pedal, just the opposite direction. These here are your gauge cocks. You open those up to check and see your water level. Back then, that's what they would have used primarily. You open it up, steam comes out, your water level's below that point. If water comes out, water level's at least at that point or somewhere in between, so you can kind of judge where the water is. Later, they'd switch to water glasses. Yeah, so the way you see them is pretty spot on. A lot of people point out the cracks you see here, and they get real concerned because it doesn't look structurally very good. But what that piece is, there's a 500-pound solid oak beam that runs all the way across, and that's basically what the weight of the tender's sitting on top of. And the way it's cracked is better for us. Had it split the other way, we would have been in trouble. But the way it is now, it's manageable. And that's just 40 years of weight being pressed down on top of it. So kind of a stress fracture, just something you're going to see. On the rods, we sort of use a hard grease. These oil cups here originally would have been there, but you can see they're on there kind of loose. They're actually just kind of dummies. They sit there to replicate what you originally would have seen, but we can take those off and we actually screw in a zerk. We got this big fancy air gun and we shoot grease into it once a week just to keep it lubricated pretty well. There's a few other pins that we'll use grease on, but for the most part then it's oil after that point. But we do run them. We don't typically use them per se for the sole purpose of adding water, but we'll test them every day we run them because we instead have to have two methods of getting water into the boiler. So we'll run one pump on one demonstration, usually about the 1 o'clock demonstration. We'll run the other side on the go-home run just to make sure that it's functioning. So we'll open the cistern valve, open the valve down here. Water floods this lower crosshead bulb and then floods up here. There's a check valve that prevents it from going backwards. As the crosshead moves back and forth, it's doing the same action as if you're pumping water out of a well. Pumps it up through the second check valve and then through it into the boiler. And the pressure that the pump creates is enough to overcome the pressure in the boiler to add the water. And then this petcock here is what we use to just make sure that it's functioning. So when we test it, we'll leave it open, make sure the water's coming out in a nice consistent stream so we know the pump is actually functioning. We'll shut it just to make sure that we're getting in and there's no issues anywhere else, and then that'll be its run for the day. You might see the cylinder's just a little off kilter. It's not perpendicular with the rails, and that was sort of something that Rogers was still doing at the time. They still kind of had their cylinders at a 10-degree angle. So everything's sort of tilted down, so if you're standing at just the right angle, it almost looks like an optical illusion, like you're looking at it wrong or like it's bent, but that's how it is.
Yeah, it's I think it's a pretty awesome place that you can really immerse yourself in the history. I mean, there aren't many places along even where the railroad grade goes now that is the original grade that was being used in 1869. You can stand there right on the site, and also you look around you and it looks exactly the same as it did in 1869. There might be a few ranch buildings around that weren't here at the time, but the landscape looks exactly the same. There aren't a bunch of housing complexes around. There's no office buildings surrounding us. So it's a really unique experience to be able to come out here and see that and really get into the history. So we hope that people, when they come out here, that they're able to experience is not only just to see the site, but really start to understand, what happened out here, why it was such a big deal. I mean, we completed the railroad across the country, and now instead of taking 6 months to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, you could do it in a week.
On Tuesday the 21st, a sheriff in Midland, Texas, drove over a dual-track crossing with the gates down and was struck by an oncoming train.
Oh my God!
The officer was responding to a call of an infant having breathing troubles. After waiting for one train to finish crossing, he pulled forward and collided with the second unseen train. Fortunately, the sheriff only sustained minor injuries and was able to walk to the hospital. The infant was also reported to have been cared for as well.
He was abandoned by his mother at an early age, but he has made a good life for himself, living in the Nevada Northern Railway engine shops. It took a while for him to warm up to the crew, not wanting to leave his hiding place under the 1907 rotary plow, but after the crew started leaving cans of tuna out for him, he slowly came out of his shell. Today, Dirt has become one of the most prominent railroad employees. His internet presence began a couple of years ago, and he has now reached the level of stardom. He's been found on such prominent internet sites such as Board Panda and such media outlets as the London Daily Mail. Dirt has become a global phenomenon, and he looks every bit the part that his name implies. The oil and the coal of the shop has given him a very distinctive look.
In December of 2017, the fatal crash of the Amtrak Cascades train resulted in the death of 3 and the injury of 57 others after approaching a 30-mile-an-hour curve at 79 miles per hour. The NTSB has just announced the results of the investigation, saying, "Failure to provide an effective mitigation for a hazardous curve and inadequate training of a locomotive engineer led to the overspeed derailment of an Amtrak passenger train that hurled off a railroad bridge and onto a busy highway in DuPont, Washington." They went on to say that in addition to the engineer being unfamiliar with the line and the engine, and the small signage for speeds, the whole accident could have been prevented had the train been equipped with positive train control. NTSB Chairman Robert Sumwalt said, "This is the third fatal overspeed passenger train derailment the NTSB has investigated since 2013. All 3 have the same thing in common. Each could have been prevented by positive train control." As the deadline for full implementation draws closer, full implementation being required for all railroads by the end of 2020, the NTSB continues to advocate for the expedited addition of the life-saving systems.
A senseless act of vandalism hit the Northern England Model Railroad Club in Market Deeping. They were all set for their annual show in a school gymnasium in Stamford, Lincolnshire, when vandals broke in and left the venue in shambles. The club's members were devastated, seeing years of their work, some pieces being 25 years in the making, so utterly destroyed. Hearing about the destruction, Sir Rod Stewart, a model railroader himself, was quick to donate £10,000 to help the club recover. He says, "It took me 23 years to build my model railway, so I feel their pain." In addition to that donation, a crowdfunding page has been set up and more than £50,000 from all over the world has been sent in to help their cause. Club Chairman Peter Davis said that they will use some of the donated funds to support other clubs doing shows to have extra security, helping them protect against similar incidents.
Following the release of the NTSB's investigation findings of the 2017 Amtrak crash last Tuesday, where they listed the lightweight rail cars as one of the contributing factors in the crash, the Washington State Department of Transportation announced they would be replacing all of the TALGO cars as soon as possible. The cars have been in use since 1998 and are woefully lacking in current crashworthiness standards, and were only allowed to operate through a grandfathering agreement with the FRA. TALGO objects to the claims that the cars are unsafe, and say that the NTSB disregarded technical information provided by TALGO. So this video is a post from our Facebook friend Alejandro Garcia Aranda from Spain. We're not sure where he found this video, but it looks so much fun, and the sound effects that were put into it over the video were just perfect.
Let's take a second look at that.
I love this so much.
It's those kids are just, they are having fun the old school way.
And I don't think I see any brakes on that either.
You know, brakes are not part of that design, but it was like when we grabbed the giant cardboard box and slid down the grassy hillside.
It's all or nothing.
It's all or nothing. When you are in it, you are in it. And yeah, I want to try.
I'd be down.
Okay, our next favorite find shifts gears completely. We also enjoy finding where popular culture and railroading intersect one another. And so this video was put out by Vogue Italia, and it's a fashion shoot that was shot aboard the luxury charter train Belmont British Pullman. And we're not sure what railway museum it was shot at. I'm sure one of you can let us know. This video really evokes kind of a 40s feel, and the gorgeous interiors of the Pullmans just absolutely set the scene. And so this underscores the fact that when a director really wants a specific kind of drama, that there's nothing that will do it except for a train.
Absolutely. So the next favorite find came from the Science Channel's Facebook page. It's a detailed computer-animated blow-apart diagram of a Canadian diesel locomotive. A fly-through of the disassembled parts gives a wonderful, impossible look at the major assemblies of the engine. You can find the link to this video in our show notes on our website, rrshowcase.com.
A mighty air compressor feeds powerful air brakes for over 1,900 train wheels. Each of the solid steel wheels is 1 meter across and weighs over half a ton. The two 6-wheel self-steering undercarriages are complex assemblies of rods, shock absorbers and levers.
And for our fourth and final favorite finds this week, we have a human interest story. We love human interest stories. We dug up a video that was shot about 7 years ago by Ben Pierce of the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. It shows off the work of the Livingston Model Railroad Club by interviewing Mike Fleming, who was 84 at the time. This video is a very gentle look at a man who was born in Livingston, Montana in the 1920s and spent almost his entire life there.
I'm Mike Fleming. I've been in Livingston for, well, other than 12 years. I've been here all my life. I was born in 1928, so I'm 84. And growing up here was just wonderful, really. When you think about it, you didn't have to lock the doors of your house or your cars, and there's very little problems other than maybe curfew violation. That's about the biggest thing that happened. And my whole family is from Livingston, born and raised. Yeah, I got 3 daughters. One lives in Townsend, one lives in Drummond, one lives in Lolo. So I just head west and get to go see them. On 6th Street, where I lived, just in one block, there were 22 kids living there. And they all went about their ways, and a few of them are still in town, but most of them are gone.
It's really worth the time to watch the entire piece. Again, the link is in our show notes. That's it for episode 20. Thanks for being here. We are grateful for your membership. Again, we're very happy to be bringing you more than twice the material that is going out on social media, so you are getting the full episode that only our Gold and Silver Spike members get to see. So thanks for coming along for the ride.
Remember, next week we're going to be going back to Ogden as well, looking at more of the big boy. So stay tuned for that.
Keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.